One of my favorite shows of all time has to be Atlanta by Donald Glover. It's a satire comedy with horrific undertones created by Donald Glover and stars him, Brian Tyree Henry, Lakeith Stanfield, and Zazie Beetz. And it premiered on FX between 2016 and 2022, 23, around that time. It's easily a top five show for its time. And honestly, it could be one of the best shows within the 21st century, if not of all time. There's a lot of things that Donald Glover does really well with this show. There's unique storytelling, there's characters that are full of depth, there is really smartly written comedy, and it's all only 4 seasons long with 10 episodes each, and it's really pretty easy to watch. However, I'm not exactly here to talk about what makes Atlanta so great, even though it is a really good show. I want to talk about something that hasn't really, I think, been talked about while the show is airing, which is how Atlanta redefines black masculinity on the small screen. It's no surprise, or it shouldn't come to no surprise, that for a long time now, really pretty much a century, I believe, black masculinity hasn't really been represented all that well on the mainstream media landscape, let alone on network television. You're either a tough guy, a criminal, a thug, a rapper, an athlete, the stereotypical black nerd. Atlanta is interesting in the sense that it doesn't exactly follow those narratives, at least not individually, but yet they kind of combine all of those different archetypes of black masculinity and blend it all into something that is original. It's bended, it's molded, and it's laughed at, honestly, or at least for us, we're laughing at it. You know what I mean? Underneath it all, Atlanta is essentially saying you don't have to be this one thing. In fact, black masculinity isn't tied to just being this one thing. You're not just a rapper. You're not just a nerd. You're not just a cool guy. You're not just a criminal. In order to understand what Atlanta is actually doing, we have to first understand what black masculinity actually is. Traditionally speaking, masculinity is often tied towards strength, boldness, and aggression and independence. However, these traits of traditional masculinity are rooted in patriarchal white frameworks. Black masculinity is pretty different in the sense that it's shaped by history, survival, resistance, and the constant pressure of being seen and unseen at the same time. And these factors create a lot of juxtapositions. You have to be strong, but not appear threatening. You have to be emotional, but not vulnerable. And shoot, depending on who you ask, you can't even be either or. And you have to be successful, but not stand out. So now that we've covered black masculinity, let's talk about some theories, specifically framing theory. When it comes to media consumption, it's not really about what we're looking at it, but how we're looking at it, or more specifically, how it's meant to be looked at. And that's where framing theory comes in. With framing theory, it shows us that stories aren't exactly being just blatantly shown, but they're being shaped. There are certain stories that are purposefully changed for better or worse. There are certain elements that are left out, certain elements that are honed in on, and ultimately the stories that are being shown can be manipulated a lot of the times. And for black men specifically, the way that we've been framed has always been pretty narrow. A lot of the times we're framed as dangerous, aggressive, hypermasculine, loud, emotionally closed off. Basically the Q dogs. I'm not gonna lie, these are the types of traits that you would see on TV way more often than in your daily life. While it may not be looked at as like a universal truth, it's repeated enough to make it feel that way. And that's where framing theory really shines against us. So when a show like Atlanta comes along, it kind of challenges framing theory in its own way. The hip hop element explored within Atlanta is a crucial part as to why black masculinity is done so well within this show. Atlanta understands that hip hop is one of the clearest spaces for black masculinity to speak freely. It's not just music. In fact, it's bigger than music. It's a form of resistance. And Atlanta lives inside that world, both the show and like the actual city. Instead of glamorizing it, the show reveals the actual tension behind it. In hip hop, authenticity equals currency, but authenticity can also feel like being in a cage. So when we see Paperboy's Rags to Riches journey, we aren't just seeing him make music and perform music, we are seeing him perform a version of himself that the world expects him to be. And through seeing that journey, we, as the audience, are faced with the question of what happens when the version of me that I want to become and the version of me that other people are expecting me to be like end up colliding. So let's talk about the show's three main characters, Earn, Paperboy, and Darius. Started with Earn. Earn is a person whose black masculinity isn't exactly represented in the way that we're used to seeing. He's socially awkward, he's broke, he's unsure of himself. Like, there's a lot going on with him. He's intelligent, like Princeton level intelligent, but he struggles a lot of the times using that intellect and translating it into certain black spaces, especially when he's in his hometown. But that's kind of the point of his character arc. Earn represents a quieter masculinity, one that's trying to grow while still carrying insecurity, pride, and failure. He loves his daughter, he wants stability, but he also sabotages himself, avoids vulnerability, pushes people away. And yet, over time, he evolves. He goes to therapy, he becomes more emotionally aware and emotionally intelligent. He starts choosing responsibility over ego. Earn shows us something we rarely see. A black man learning how to become better without losing himself in the process. Then you have Paperboy. At first, he looks like the stereotype, the rapper, street figure, tough guy. But Atlanta slowly peels that image apart because Alfred, aka Paperboy, isn't just tough. He's tired. He's tired of performing, tired of being watched, tired of trying to stay real in a world that rewards exaggeration. His masculinity is built on authenticity. But even authenticity becomes complicated when it turns into a brand. And underneath it all is vulnerability, uncertainty. A man trying to figure out who he is when the spotlight turns off. And then you have Darius. Darius doesn't perform masculinity the way we expect, like, at all. He's calm, philosophical, eccentric. He moves through the world like he's slightly outside of it, but that distance gives him clarity. He sees things that others don't, feels things others avoid, and exists without constantly trying to prove himself. Darius represents something rare, a version of black masculinity that is soft without appearing weak, strange without being dismissed, present without being performative. And in a show built on tension, Darius feels like release. Through learning about Atlanta and its characters, we learn that Atlanta doesn't give us one version of black masculinity. It gives us many. Earn shows us growth. Paperboy shows us pressure. Darius shows us possibility. And together, they tell a story that feels honest. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Because black masculinity isn't just one voice. It's a chorus. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's conflicted. But always human. And maybe that's what Atlanta does best. It doesn't try to define black men. It lets them exist.